What's up, guys? Welcome to the show. We are talking about Let's Get Specific. Today, we have none other than my good friend, Hobson Carroll, world-class actuary from Intrust. And the conversation me and him have a lot is talking about specific deductibles, setting the deductibles. When are they appropriate? What type of deductibles can we utilize to mitigate risks and price them appropriately? So welcome to the show, Hobson.
No, welcome to the Houston area, John. Good to have you here.
H-Town. Houston playing tomorrow night. Astros in the World Series. All right, so let's get into it. Why don't you just talk about the specific deductible and where it originated from? We've got the specific, we've got the aggregate. Let's talk about specific.
Yeah, well, for a lot of people in today's world, the specific seems to be the most important thing because everyone realizes that individuals have large claims and we don't want $2 million claims hitting the budget of the employer self-insured plan. So, but if you go back to earlier times when claims didn't get so big and stop-loss insurance for self-insured plans was just sort of starting out after ERISA was passed. I mean, it existed in one form or another before that, but it was generally referred to, and this gets into something which is very important in any discussion involving the self-insured world, and that is nomenclature. In reality, in the early days, it was referred to as individual excess risk insurance. And, of course, the aggregate protection, which is aggregated, was known as the aggregate excess risk insurance. Excess risk being the term used to describe what happens to the claims over a certain amount.
They also call it catastrophic coverage.
Well, that's true too. It can be, but that's rarely used.
That's what the employers think of it as.
Well, it protects against catastrophic losses from an individual impacting their plan. Absolutely. However, the policy form that the stop-loss carrier uses invariably uses the expression specific stop-loss insurance or individual excess risk insurance or individual stop-loss insurance. These terms are all basically interchangeable. As long as we understand what the concept is, which has to do with the fact that let's take an employer says, well, I'm going to self-insure my health insurance benefits for my employees. Okay, rather than turn a premium over to a carrier every month, and it's their responsibility to take care of the claims for the employees. The employer says, I'm going to be the insurer. Under ERISA, I become the self-insurer, if you will. And I look and I say, I've got a pot where my employees and their dependents are going to pour all their claims. Okay, and I need that pot to be protected because it can't get too big or I'll be spending too much money. So they use risk mitigation tools, okay, if I can use that expression, to protect how that pot can accumulate and if that pot gets too big and overflows, the employer goes, man, I lost a lot of money compared to what I was expecting to pay. So they use two major tools for that. One is, he says, I don't want the claims on any one individual to blow my budget for the whole year. I mean, if something happens in the first month of my year, and I have an individual in a car accident, or I have a premature baby, or I have someone that's born with hemophilia, and I've got to pay for that drug for the rest of the year, I know right away I'm using a big chunk of what I thought my expected claims or my budget was, okay? So I buy an individual stop-loss policy, a policy that stops the losses on any one individual during that
per
time
belly
period.
button, not per employee. Per belly button.
Right. In the early days, it was almost
I'm getting specific here,
per employee,
guys.
but you are, yes. Okay, per person, sorry. Yes, individual, okay. And in addition to that, the employer often, not always, but often says, I still want to protect the pot in case it overflows from too many claims that are below the specific attachment point or specific deductible, that point where I want to protect the claims for individual catastrophic
Quantify
claims.
that for me. Give me an example.
Well, let's say I buy a specific stop-loss insurance attachment point or deductible at $50,000 per person per the calendar year or the period of time, the plan year. What that does is bifurcate all claims into two mutually exclusive and mutually complementary sets, okay? that ends up totaling the total claims. Those claims that are up to the specific deductible of $50,000 and all the claims that exceed $50,000. Now, when I say exceeds $50,000, I mean amounts in excess of the 50,000 point. I don't count the first 50 with that. The first 50 goes into the first pot, right? The claims up to 50. And then if it's the 50,000th and first dollar, that next dollar goes to the specific pot. Okay. But anyway, all claims will fall into one of those two subsets, right? And you add them together and you've got your total claims that you're going to have for the year. But for that stuff that's all below, which is where most of the claims are going to be, obviously below the specific deductible, I mean, in almost every imaginable situation, you may still want to purchase a protection against that total pot. And that's where the aggregate, which is, it means you aggregate all of the claims from the individuals
under 50,000.
Under 50,000 in this case, and you throw them into the pot. Well, the employer may still want, there could be an epidemic of a really bad flu, and you could have a half a dozen people who hit $50,000 because it was really, really hard to deal with it, and he may blow his budget for the aggregate anyway. Well, so he may buy and say, look, I'm willing to go on the risk for so much money and maybe another 20 or 25%, but I'm not willing to go more than that. So that's where the aggregate comes from. The point is you use those two tools to really hone down and protect your total spend for the year, what your total spend is going to be.
Now, you said most claims fall under the specific. Is there a number that we know that typically this percentage of members are going to breach the specific and it's going to equate to X amount of claims?
Well, yeah, I mean, actuarial tables, there are plenty of actuarial manuals, rating manuals around that.
Oh, those listening, Hobson wrote one of the stop-loss manuals that they use to price underwriting.
Well, yeah,
Side note.
That was a bit of time ago, but I'm still familiar with what's
still around
now. And the point is it usually includes information relating to what the frequency expectation is and the dollar amount above that level for every dollar amount you can think of. So at $5,000, $10,000, $20,000, $50,000, it'll tell you what the percentage is. Now, any given group is going to vary from, a global average.
So it would be based off of the spec.
Right. These tables are used to generate the expected claims on a manual basis for the specific risk at any given deductible
How often
level.
are those updated?
Well, most of the major actuarial houses update those annually.
With the change in the cost of care.
Yeah. Now, you can, a lot of that doesn't mean that stop-loss underwriters necessarily update their manuals every year because they include a trend factor that takes into consideration the increase in claims costs over time. So they may go 1 or 2 or 3 years before they update their manual, and then they just tweak the result. The actuarial manuals they attempt to be as accurate as they can for the time period that they release their manual. And the underwriting process uses both the specific information about a group, such as their age and sex and where they are, their demographics, because claims costs vary by location, etc. So that's all taken into consideration in conjunction with the manual to come up with the expected claims, if you will, that will fall into that specific part of the total claims costs.
Okay. How do we go about setting the specific? When you look at it actuarially, we've got a group, let's say it's 100 lives. How do you go about setting that specific?
Well, there's a lot of variation in the thinking about this. You'll see ranges from, it can range quite a bit. It depends somewhat on the risk appetite of the employer sponsor of the plan. But as a general rule, underwriters are comfortable with a range that's anywhere from 5 to 15% of the total expected claims that they have for that group. So they estimate the total picture of what they think the claims are going to be.
So if it's that's $1 million. So 100 life persons, $1 million, they want to spec from 50 to 100, typically probably.
You're going to see that a lot. Now, that doesn't mean that there won't be situations where you see 25 and you may see 200. because that $1 million of expected total claims can range quite a bit depending on the age and sex and demographics, the plan of benefits, et cetera, and the network that's being used. All of those things go into
factors. Yeah. And if I'm a consultant and I'm looking to provide option to my clients, what should I be looking at? How many different specific deductibles? How should I analyze it from a consultant standpoint?
Well, there you kind of like need to understand the basic theory and understand how the interrelationship between the specific and the aggregate and the specific deductible level and the premiums that are going to be charged for it, how those are connected. And for that, I'd like to take you up to the whiteboard.
We're going there already. Is that the aggregating specific or no? That's just setting specific.
Not yet.
All right, to the whiteboard.
So I've got to turn around here so I can talk to you.
Keep that mic up by your mouth.
So what I'm showing here is just a basic simplified picture of what's going on with the self-insured plan. Again, the self-insured plan is this big pot, right? An employer says to his employees and their benefit and their dependents, bring all your claims and pour them into this pot, and I'm going to take care of it. Okay? And then the employer looks and says, that pot could get pretty big, or it could overflow. I've only got a pot this big that I want to spend the money on, and if the claims go over that, I'm going to be out a lot. So I buy aggregate stop loss insurance, which says, okay, if the claims exceed this point, I pay a premium to an insurance company to pay the amount that overflows that point. Okay, that's aggregate stop loss insurance. But if I have one person who has $1 million claim, that could fill half the pot up depending on what the size of my group is, and that might endanger the aggregate. So I say, well, I don't want to have that happen either, so I buy individual stop loss insurance, right, or specific stop loss insurance. Now here's a picture of all the people in the plan, right? And here's the specific deductible. I've just drawn a line. I haven't put a dollar amount to it. It could be $50,000, it could be $25,000, it could be $100,000, right? But what we look at is the actual claims that every one of our little sick people have, okay? Obviously, anything that is below this line, the cutoff, right, for the specific deductible, comes over here and gets dumped in our pot, our aggregate pot, okay? I've got a person here who went above the specific deductible. So this much, or the amount up to the specific deductible, will go over here into this pot.
Call it $50,000.
Call it $50,000. Okay, so let's say that's $50,000. Let's call it $50,000. $50K. That's supposed to be a 5, and that's supposed to be a K. Okay. So up to $50,000, including the first $50,000, the claims come over into this pot. But the amount in excess, and let's suppose this was a $75,000 claim. 75K, okay? So that $25,000, which represents the difference here, right? It would be thrown into another pot. Remember I said there's two subsets that make up the total. The total, the aggregate claims, and then the claims that go towards the specific. That's what this little pot is. That we're going to pour all the claims that are above the line, right? We're going to put them in here. And what the employer does is pay an insurance company a premium, right, to cover all the claims in that pot. And that's the specific deductible and the specific stop loss insurance. So they pay a specific premium to a carrier to take that catastrophic risk, okay? They pay a premium for that. Over here, they're funding all these claims, but they pay a premium in case the claims overflow, and that's the aggregate premium. The aggregate premium is not usually very much, not under normal circumstances, okay? But this can be a lot. This depends on the level of the specific deductible, the risk involved in the plan, how rich the plan is, etc. So see, here we have another one. We had a big one. We had like, let's say a $200,000 claim. So $150,000 is going to come down here. The first 50 goes where? Back over here. So we've accounted for every claim that employer had in one of these two pots. Okay? There's a reason for that. All right? Obviously, the more claims that if we lower this line, make the deductible lower, right? That means we logically assume there will be more claims that exceed that line on average, and for a manual, let's say. I'm not talking about the actual claims of a given group, but what you would expect for a book of business. That means this little pot gets bigger in size in terms of what we expect. The bigger that pot is on an expected basis, the more premium we're going to pay. Okay? Simple relationship. Lower the specific deductible, premium for that goes up. Raise the
You're
specific
buying more insurance.
That's right. Raise the specific deductible, and you expect less claims to be in excess of the line. This little pot gets smaller. It costs less.
So I'm coming up on renewal. I've got a $50,000 spec. I've got, two people one person that breached the spec the year before. I'm looking at, and you can go into your opinion, and I'll give my opinion on it. I'm looking at a specific deductible of $60,000 this year and saying, okay, how do we determine whether we should go to 60 or not, in your opinion?
Well, all things being equal, for a book of business, okay, the premium for a $50,000 specific is going to go up by a trend factor that exceeds first dollar trend every year.
And that's what's called leverage trend.
Leverage trend.
Just give a quick synopsis of that, if you could.
So if you want to offset the premium, right. I usually do that by the example of home equity, because people like home equity gains, right? So you buy a house for $100,000, except you borrowed $90,000 from the bank to do it, right? If you're in the right market, in 1 year the house is now worth $110,000, and your equity is $20,000. That's a huge increase. Whereas the whole house only went up 10%. You doubled your money. Okay. Reverse that, and it's what happens with claim trend. Okay.
So basically, what it means is the cost to insure a claim that is, let's say, $100,000 a year that they're pricing for actuarially.
And you leave it there.
And if they incur that same claim that, let's say, it's a double knee and it's $100,000 this year, next year it's going to be $110,000. So in order to insure that same specific deductible, the carrier now takes on $10,000 more additional cost to them to pay out that claim, which means what? They have to charge you more in premium, which is leverage trend.
Right. So the $50,000 example, on your example, exactly. The first year it was $50,000 excess of $50,000. Then it becomes $110,000, so now it's $60,000 excess of $50,000. So I went up. How much did the stop loss claim go up? $10,000 over $50,000 is a 20% increase, even though overall trend was only 10.
Yeah. So when you look at stop loss renewals and your group is running well, and you're saying, well, why am I getting an increase? Well, you're getting a trend increase. What that means is the cost of medical care has now increased to insure your group and pay the same claims it paid last year. It's going to cost more money to pay out, which means it's going to cost more from the insurance component.
Right. Or if you increase your deductible.
So go back to that. So we're gonna look at, okay, if we want to offset trend, we're gonna maybe do a baby bump to 52.5.
Right? Or 55 or something
55,
if
60.
you go to 55, you increase your deductible 10%, which is equivalent to the first dollar trend, and you'll basically offset almost all the increase. And in fact, in this example...
So talk about that for a second. So if I get a trend increase of 5, what do I need to increase percentage-wise of the specific deductible to offset the trend increase? The same percentage amount?
If you believe your first dollar trend, all the pressure on all your claims from ground up is 5%.
What's it typically?
Well, these days, carriers are using, to underwrite aggregate and experience rate and everything, are using anywhere from 8 to 10%. Now, that incorporates the huge increase that they're using for RX, because RX is starting to heat up and kind of go nuts again. And so what it contributes brings the total to, let's say it's 8%. Let's say it's 8. Okay? So you would need to increase your specific deductible by 8% to essentially offset.
Just offset. So let me jump to a fully insured product. When they talk about a trend increase and they're bitching because it went up 8%, are they just simply, we're changing no factors, no nothing. We're getting increased 8% just to keep up with the cost of medical care.
Let's assume that there were no major pooled claims and everything's kind of nice and quiet, and they hit pretty much expected claims. then that's exactly right. We're saying that if you're in a network with, a PPO network, et cetera, those contracts are all going to go up, 5, 6, 7, 8%. And I'm not done at the board though.
Okay.
5, 6, 7, 8%. And so they're saying I need that just to stay even. I mean,
just to break even. Yeah.
that's right.
Employers are bitching, brokers are bitching, and it's like, well, the cost of medical care has increased just by trend, meaning what they pay for a need last year versus this year is 8% more. So the cost of insurance to insure that same knee surgery is more money. So let's go back to the 50, 60,000. We talk about bumping it just to give you an idea of what I look at is if this year is the same as last year, I'll say, okay, if we're going to increase the deductible, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, to 60, right? What's the premium savings? Let's say I save $15,000 in premium savings. And last year, one person breached it. So if last year is this year, okay, or this year is last year, okay, that one person is probably going to cost us the extra $10,000 because they breached the 50 and went over 60. So I take on $10,000 more claim costs as an employer, but I save 15, so I'm ahead 15.
Right.
So
the 10 goes in here.
Yeah.
Because why? Because if the specific deductible goes up, you expect more claims.
Yeah, you're laying
here,
off more money in the aggregate. Yeah.
Risk.
So if one person breaches it, which you assume they breached not only the 50, they breached the 60. I save 15 grand on one side to lay out 10 more. So if one breaches it, I'm okay. But if two, then I lose. I'm behind 5 grand. So you've got to play with those numbers and say, okay, based on my premium savings by changing a specific deductible, how many people breach it where it doesn't make sense? And you've got to make that determination as a consultant and knowing your group and knowing your risk.
Well, and if you're talking about a 100-life group, we're not talking about a great deal of credibility in the frequency numbers anyway.
Sure.
We're not talking about a great deal of credibility at 400 lives, even as far as a $100,000 claim level. It just all changes. A lot of it is basically you got to realize that a basic principle for underwriters for specific stop-loss insurance is setting the risk is that if you have set your specific deductible at a level where you expect a whole bunch of claims against the premium, you need to raise your specific deductible.
It's just because then it becomes risk. It becomes financing.
You're swapping dollars.
Plus the
Why
fat,
do you swap dollars?
Plus
and that
the
leads
margins,
to,
the taxes. Yeah.
That leads to a discussion of what happens when this little pot that represented the claims in excess of the specific, okay, was covered by the specific stop loss and the specific premium is paid for it. What happens when that gets to be a significant size? We're talking $300,000, $400,000 or something like that, right? Well, actually, assuming that's $100,000 or a $125,000 deductible, $150,000 deductible, something that's not $500,000, okay? The chances are the carrier's not going to see a 0 loss ratio account at that level, okay? You're going to have something. It'll be 10% or 50% or 70% or 150%, okay, or 200%. But the point is there are going to be claims against a $400,000 premium pool, okay? So that's where they look and they say, you may not be keeping enough risk into your aggregate. You're insuring your catastrophic risk at too low a level. If you really are comfortable there, one of the things we could do to lower the premium, right, is what did we do over here on the claims that were lower than the specific deductible? We put them into a pot as a whole, right? And then we have an attachment point that represents a self-insured risk by the employer, the corridor, the aggregate corridor, 125% of expected, something like that. And in fact, what happens there then is that I'm taking the risk that the claims will go from below expected claims to as much as 125% of expected claims, and then my losses are stopped, okay? But that only involves the claims up to the specific deductible. Remember I said the specific deductible puts claims into one of two subsets, right? All of the claims below the deductible and the claims that exceed the deductible. Well, this pot represents the claims that exceeded the deductible. When it gets to a certain size, who's to say we can't write an aggregate on that subset of claims? And that's what an aggregating specific is. That's all it really is. Now, they don't attach at 100% of expected claims. What they do is they let you, they being the carrier, let you self-insure some portion of what that premium, say that premium was going to be $400,000. Okay, they say, look, the chances are you're going to have, at least $100,000 worth of excess claims. This is all above, I don't know, $100,000 specific deductible. Well, why do we charge you a premium and then load taxes and commissions and fees and stuff on top of it when we're just going to turn around and give you back $100,000? So why don't you basically write a little baby aggregate, okay, on excess claims excess of the deductible. When you hit $100,000, when you've paid $100,000 of claims that would otherwise be in this pot, then we'll come in. And in exchange for that, we'll knock off $100,000 of premium or something like that.
So aggregating specific, where do you typically see that? Where is it a right fit? When should brokers use it?
Whenever
are you a fan of it?
It's not. Carriers don't want to do this unless the premium is significant for the reason I said earlier. When the premium is a certain height, okay, a certain size, then we can look at it and say, it's reasonable and logical to assume any group is going to have claims against that premium. Some claims. They might not be very much, but they're going to have claims. Okay? And it's that situation. So it just depends on the size of the group, the size of the deductible, and the size of the premium. There's no magic formula, and every carrier feels differently about it. Most of the time, they just assume not give up the premium.
Do they want to write? Do they want to write an aggregating specific?
Well, it depends on how they do it. I personally like it because I do a trade. I can show that the downside risk dollars available to the carrier for a specific deductible is greater if I have the aggregating specific than when I don't. But some carriers don't write it that way because there's a lot of carriers that really quite don't understand the theory of this either. They just look at it and say, we really don't want to write it. We're going to do a one-to-one trade-off. Okay, fine. Okay, whatever. All right. They will if they're pushed, but not on $100,000 a premium or $200,000 a premium.
Okay.
But $300,000, maybe. Remember, it's basically saying you should have written a higher specific deductible so that my pot would be smaller and then we don't have to deal with it.
Then why are they even writing the deductibles that low and then getting to this factors? Just because the employer doesn't like risk?
Tradition. Okay. It's been there. The employer likes it. The broker likes it. The broker likes it, especially if they're making compensation on the premium directly. Okay, they don't want to. They like it if they can keep the rate increase. Say they've had good experience. See, the lower the specific deductible and the higher this premium, the more you can actually argue that there's some credibility to the specific risk. And if they didn't have a bad year, they may not get a big trend increase. Okay, well then why raise the deductible? All right, but you can still save money. The employer can still save money by saying, "Look, I'll just self-insure a portion of that all those excess dollars, because why not? If I don't have any claims, I just saved $100,000 out of this $400,000. If I have $500,000 in claims, I'm no worse off than I was. I mean, that's the way to look at it. Now, the carrier, you can say, well, if that's the way it is, why isn't it worse for the carrier? It is only on the upside for the carrier. In other words, if there's no claims, the carrier gave up $100,000. Okay? Because they're only getting $300,000 to pay zero claims. But if they price this correctly, they actually have more risk dollars because of an aggregate corridor that you put on here, and they actually exchange that for a less chance that they'll lose money, a slightly less chance. Okay, so they give up some of their positive, the upside to lower their downside by a similar amount, and then if that's what it takes to keep the case, there you go.
Where I've seen somebody use it as a strategy of, we've got a laser, we're willing to mitigate or all right. So we're just saying. So I've seen strategies where brokers or consultants or re-insurers are using a aggregating specific maybe to offset the risk of a laser.
Absolutely, that's one of the uses of an aggregate. There are different ways to
talk to me. Break that down for me.
Carve the turkey, okay?
Yeah.
And so if everyone,
when you're looking at a group that's 50 lives, 150 lives, and we've got a $125,000 laser, it's a challenge to give it to the employer, and we've got to come up with creative options.
The key is that it's on a person.
Okay.
So what you're basically throwing the dice on one person. Does that person hit the 125,000 or don't they hit 125,000?
Okay.
If I add 125,000 to my specific premium and then do an aggregating specific for the 125, any number of people can eat up the 125. Okay. The problem with the laser is except with there's a trade-off. If you do the laser and the person dies, God bless them, okay, then it turns out to be no expense, okay, and the employer just simply wins because they didn't have to spend any money, and the carrier's not out because they didn't take a risk on, it didn't happen. If you do it as an aggregating specific, however, and the person dies, you still got $125,000 you've got to accumulate from everybody else before the stop loss carrier starts paying.
Got it.
So it's not always so simple. You gotta think about the situation, and then it's like. But the thing is, it's usually everybody knows what's going on, so it's like it's very hard to game the situation.
The reinsurers know the tricks. Are you doing it on a laser that is a full blown laser, or it's a conditional laser? Does that come into play? If it's a conditional laser on the member, the laser is membered, full blown.
Okay, I'm not sure I know what you mean by conditional laser.
So conditional laser, it's somebody that if they take this med, we're lasering it specifically this med. Or if it's somebody that just has bad histories, like any hospital say any med, lasers on 100% of claims.
Okay, I have to admit I'm not so familiar with the conditional laser because I'm not sure how I would write it into the policy, but I don't know, maybe other people with interest are familiar with it. I get the concept of what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say if you can do a conditional laser, that kind of like takes care of it. Yeah, I mean, you would have sort of the same thing with with a certain strategy for say, okay, these two people who have these ongoing conditions, they're not going to be in the plan next year. Mm-hmm. And the carrier says, well, how do I know that? Because I'm going to arrange for them to get coverage elsewhere. Well, how do I know that? So I'm going to put a laser. That's a conditional laser. If these people are still there, then they're going to have a laser. But if they're not there, then it doesn't apply. So I suppose that works just as well. The point is there are variations. If you've seen one laser policy, you've maybe seen it one laser policy, and they're not all the same. They're very similar. Also, ask yourself about what no laser guarantees. If carriers actually say that in the stop loss policy anywhere, or is it an administrative letter? Where's the piece of paper you can hang your hat on when they give you a laser increase next year or a rate increase? Same with rate increase guarantees. Okay, there may be some out there, but I'm still waiting to see a definitive piece of paper that says the promise that's being made by a lot of people.
No new laser rate cap.
Yeah, well, the rate cap too. Yeah, I mean,
new laser in perpetuity.
Yeah.
What else do we want to cover on specific? So let's go back to. I want to go back to what I've seen in policies, and we'll wrap it up in a minute, is setting the corridor on the aggregate at 125, right? And you see some policies that they set the corridor at 110, and they're doing this to squeeze the attachment point, and they're increasing specific premiums. What is your thought?
Increasing, so they should be increasing the aggregate premium.
Well, that as well, but they're increasing the total cost on aggregate and specific premium to squeeze the attachment point down to get closer to fully insured.
Well, here's
where I see it in most cases.
Here's the theory. Okay, the 125% again is one of those tradition things. It was like what they originally did in the original policy written by Lloyd's. They said, "Oh, let's set it at 125%." And everybody thought that was what the Bible said, and so it's been 125%. But the fact of the matter is there's nothing magic about 125%. You can set it at 100, and some people set for smaller employers. They say we'll do stop loss on smaller employers, but it's 135% corridor in order to equalize the severity of the randomness. Okay, and but there's also for larger groups, they can say, well, we can do 120, we can do 117 and a half, we can do 115. The key is that there's a premium adjustment On the aggregate, the specific has no impact. I mean, isn't impacted by where you set the aggregate attachment point. Although, relatively speaking, the same specific deductible will endanger an aggregate attachment point that's been set lower, obviously, more frequently. But you adjust for that with the aggregate premium. That's the whole point. There's a total actuarial theory of the risk of the aggregate stop loss. A lot of people think, no, there was no magic to it at all. But there's a full theory about it. I mean, and what happens is you lower the attachment point for the same specific deductible. If you're protecting the aggregate with a specific, like our diagram up here, and then you lower the corridor, okay, you're basically saying to the employer is going to take less and less risk, downside risk, okay? At 125%, the employer's on the risk for the difference between 100 and 125. If they come in below 100, right, then they had a good deal. They came in lower than expected claims. They pocket the money. That's one of the reasons employers do this. I mean, that's one of the positives. It's usually not the only reason. If they come in at 110% of expected claims, then they've lost 10% versus where they thought it would be. If they come in at 120, it's 20%. If they come in at 125, it's 20. But then they say, I'm done at 125. I'm going to buy my stop loss at 125%. What's the premium for that? $6,000, whatever. Okay, not a lot usually. On a per head basis, it's like 80 cents, or depending on the size of the group. You know, it's got to be a minimum amount to issue the policy. So it looks like more per person for a small group. But,
yeah,
but if you lower the attachment point, the premium's going to go up, and it goes up more and more as it geometrically increases as you lower the attachment point.
Yeah, I see a lot of the BUCAs, they'll set it at 110.
Oh, that's how they do the level funded.
And they love to collect more in premium. And then they love to sell to the client next year that, hey, you're running bad. You're running, you've breached your aggregate.
You're running bad
when the aggregate's typically not set appropriate anyway with the BUCA, and they just play the shadow price game.
Actually, they don't. The way that level funded concept works is you don't charge the premium you should for the aggregate, but you lower the attachment point. The premium increase should be, let's say, 80%, but they only increase it 40%. That's of a small number, but still, all right. Over their book of business, they're going to lose money on that aggregate if they don't make it up. How do they make it up? They make it up with that residual payment that they take from the loss, the claims fund at the end of the year.
Run out.
Whatever they no, it's not the run out. The money belongs to the employer, but they take it as a residual premium, a residual management fee.
Yeah, they take this. Some of them, the
claims fee.
The wonderful Green Tree company likes to take a month and a half of
claims
surplus.
If you terminate, they take more.
Well, they take it all.
Or
anything
all.
that's left over.
That money goes against the premium that they lowered their premium for to make up, so that their book of business, that's why they do this. This book of business is treated like it's fully insured block.
Sure.
That's where they came. The BUCAs got their level funded products by worrying about losing the 50 to 100 market when the ACA originally was going to make 100 lives a small group. Mm-hmm. Then Obama canceled it. But they were all ready to say, how are we going to keep our 50 to 100 life bread and butter business? The good clients are all going to go self-insured. We have to have something like that, but we don't want to lose our advantage of fully insured. So they designed the level funded premium with the residual charge, and that's how they get close to being a fully insured profile for them. Okay, but in reality, you could write an aggregate only on a 500 life group. Perfect. You could write 110% attachment point with no specific, or a specific at $1 million just to protect you against really excessive things. And the max cost on that would be really low. And there's a premium for it that makes money for the carrier if they have a block of that business. Brokers hate that, though. Consultants, brokers, not just brokers, everybody who's in the selling business, TPAs who sell the business direct, they hate that because they say, oh, no, if I have $1 million claim, I have to be able to go to the employer and say, but we bought you specific, so you're okay. They don't want to take the risk on the aggregate pool. But the aggregate stop loss works perfectly fine with or without specific.
Hobson Carroll, everybody. Hobson, thanks for being on the show.
Hey, glad to be here.
Let's get specific. See you soon, guys.